Okay, I think it's 2 minutes past 11 in the UK now, so I think we will get started. Just please note, as Andrew said in the chat, we are recording this session. So hello, welcome, a very warm welcome from me to everybody here. It's great to see so many of you joining us today. My name is Laura Haig. I chair the ACE Health and Safety Group, and I'm also the Group Safety Manager for Mott MacDonald. And I'm going to be introducing you today to the launch of our new guide, which is called Managing Wellbeing Risk. It's a practical guide for people working in the engineering consultancy sector. And it's no coincidence that we're launching it today. It's the day before World Mental Health Day, tomorrow, and we really wanted to mark that occasion and hopefully provide something to the industry which is really going to help all of us move to a better place for well-being. We're going to spend a few minutes just talking about the guide and explaining how it works, and then we're going to share some of the case studies with you. There will be some time at the end for questions. If you have questions as we go through, either make a note of them and you can ask them personally at the end, or just pop them in the chat and hopefully we'll have time to get to them once we've been through the case studies. Okay, so I will move on. So where did we get, how did we got today? Have we got to here today when we want to talk about this guide and the launch of it? So it really started quite some time ago, actually, in January 2023. And I was having some conversations with colleagues in the ACE about where we were as an industry with wellbeing and how we could move forward. And one of the things that I was really keen about was the fact that in a lot of wellbeing instances, we're quite reactive to things. We support people, but we're quite reactive. And I wanted to try and move to a position where we were being more proactive, and even more than that, actually taking preventative action to prevent wellbeing harm. In a similar way that we do with health and safety, in that we identify wellbeing risk, we look at the control measures that we can put in place to reduce that risk and hopefully eliminate it, so that we're actually stopping people becoming harmed from, you know, psychosocial reasons. Sorry, could you, if you've just joined, could you put yourself on mute, please? Thank you. So at the same time that we had conversations with the ACE, I was also talking. Hi, could you put yourself on mute, please? Thank you. At the same time that we were having discussions within the ACE, we were also talking to our wellbeing partners, International SOS, and having a very similar type of conversation about where next, where do we take this as Mott MacDonald? And so actually the three organisations put their heads together and thought, there's so much good stuff happening out in industry. What we really need is to get people together and to listen and learn from what's going on out there. What are the challenges? What are the barriers to us moving forward in wellbeing? So what we did is we organised an event which was held in September last year. And the second half of that event was really looking at workshops. So we had some fantastic speakers in the morning to set the scene. And then we used the afternoon session to really hone in on what are our wellbeing issues in our sector? What are we doing about them at the moment? And what more could we do? What's being effective? And then we took the output from those workshops, and that really formed the basis for our guide. Obviously, it wasn't as simple as that. There was a massive amount of information that had to be distilled and really analysed. But we did that. It took us another year, but we're really, really proud to be here today to you know, present and launch this guide with you. It's a fairly lengthy document, but I make no apologies for that. Wellbeing is a really complex issue. There are lots of different threads weaving in and out. There are lots of overlaps, you know, in the EDI space with sustainability. There are all sorts of things that we need to consider. And we also work in a fairly complex sector. You know, we have different disciplines involved. We have a lot of different stakeholders with different interests. And we can work on some fairly complex projects. So hopefully the guide that will be launched tomorrow and that we're going to show you in a moment will be a reflection of that, and will really help all of us to move forward in the wellbeing space and start to reduce harm, which is the overall aim. I'm going to hand over to my colleague now, Grace Jenkins, who is going to say a little bit more about the guidance, and then we'll move on to look at the case studies. Thanks, Grace.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. Good morning, everyone. As Laura said, my name's Grace Jenkins. I'm the Global Wellbeing Advisor at Mott MacDonald. I'm going to briefly take you through the setup of the Wellbeing Guidance, how it's been structured, so you get a sense of what to expect once it's released tomorrow on World Mental Health Day. So as well as the sections that I've put on the slide, there is an introduction, and as part of this introduction, we've outlined its purpose, which is to help anyone with a role in an engineering consultancy project who needs to balance both commercial and people-focused priorities. After the introduction, we've organised it into the following main sections that you can see on the slide. So organisational. In this section, we look at how work is organised and the importance of setting up a consultancy project, setting it up at bid stage with potential wellbeing risks front of mind. The next section is all about social factors. The focus of this is on the importance of leadership, setting a positive example to help build an inclusive workplace culture. It's also in this part of the guidance where we demonstrate the intersectionality, as Laura said, between wellbeing and EDI or DNI, whatever you call it within your organisation, and how someone's sense of belonging or potentially their lack of it can impact an individual's experience of work. And then we move on to the physical and environment section. This explores the intrinsic link between a more traditional physical safety and those aspects at work, and also how someone's environment can have a huge impact and potentially cause emotional harm to them, or I guess we could call it kind of wellbeing harm. The final section, the square that's in orange, looks at a project's life cycle. In this section, we highlight key questions for you, the readers, to consider when bidding for work, right through to the close of a project, and when you're going through that process of kind of capturing lessons to learn and share for future work with the rest of your organisation. Oh, sorry, skipped. So the guidance itself is a piece of work that's relevant to a global audience and organizations. Its framework and the way we kind of built it and structured it is based on the ISO 45003 international standard for managing psychological risk at work. I think its key value as a report are the case studies and learning within it. I think this really helps bring the content within it and the control measures that Laura talked about to life. There are case studies throughout it from the UK, India, and also the US. They're from our sector, engineering consultancies, but there's also learning from different sectors as well. You can take from it what you need depending on the size of your organisation and where you are in your kind of wellbeing journey. We're about to hear more details from 4 of the case studies that are part of the guidance from organisations who kind of helped us bring this document, bring this piece of work to fruition. So without further ado, I'd like to say absolutely huge thank you to our panelists and speakers. So to just introduce them quickly, we have Danielle from WSP, we have Samantha from Costain, Neil from AtkinsRealis, and we have Dr. Rod from International SOS. All of these speakers will be sharing kind of some of the learning within the guidance. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Danielle, our first speaker. So Danielle Carney is the Wellbeing Manager from WSP's UK. She'll be talking to us about the Smart Motorway Alliance. This was a joint venture collaboration that provided smaller organisations within the Alliance with wellbeing resources and support. So Danielle, please do tell us more about the Alliance.
Thank you, Grace, and good morning, everybody. So as Grace mentioned, I'm talking a bit about our work on the Smart Motorway Alliance and the wellbeing programme we embedded within the Alliance. And so just for some context, the Alliance was an enterprise made up of 7 organisations and also over 70 supplier partners. And part of that mission statement was uniting diverse teams, and that's what we really wanted to do with the wellbeing programme within the Smart Motorway Alliance. It was ensuring that it was equitable, so no matter where you worked, that you had access to the same wellbeing information, resources, support than your counterparts, no matter the size of the organisation that you worked for. And so with that, we had limited resource in terms of focus. So I was working between 8 and 12 hours per week on this.
And so Michelle.
Oh, I think someone's not on mute. I think someone put yourself
Yes,
on mute. Thank you. And so what we started with within the Smart Motorways was just connecting all of our partners together, and that really set up the top with a leadership steering group. So we had representatives from all of the organisations plus supplier partner representatives, and that was helpful to understand what our main risks were. And one of them in particular was around that disconnect between designers and the delivery teams as well, and not always understanding the expectations of each type of working, each type of role. And so we really wanted to sort of break down that barrier and actually get more collaboration between design and delivery through the wellbeing space. So with that, we set up some working groups and connection groups and really established those wellbeing ways of working. And some of the main things that we did was create, first of all, one of our wellbeing toolkits. So it was a resource that everyone had access to. We all worked on our very own different SharePoint platforms. And if you worked for a small recovery company, there was no information. If you worked for a big organisation like WSP, you had loads of access to resources. So we wanted to make sure that it was something that everyone could seek support and gain information around wellbeing. It was virtual, it's a printed document. I've seen it, the whole document is printed in the side of one of the sites that we have on the M1. And so people really took that opportunity to really share all the resources that we have. And again, it was sent out to all of our supplier partners. We had an input and review into that as well. One of the other things that we did to try and understand some of those risks were we ran mini surveys, engagement surveys. We did stress risk assessments on some of our projects as well to really connect those relationships between our partners and suppliers on what are the biggest risks for this particular scheme that they were working on. One of the other things that we did to ensure that it was equitable was provide access to mental health support for everybody. So some of our big organisations, and some of you are in those big organisations that have access to employee assistance programmes, that wasn't the case for our smaller and micro organisations. So we connected with Maximus, which is a free support via the Department of Work and Pensions to provide access to mental health support. And so by partnering with them, that they can then support those smaller organisations with mental health support through vocational conversations with therapists. And that really made a difference to ensure that everyone had access to that mental health support as well. And alongside that, we also did some co-collaboration of activities as well. We've got matrices to be able to help consider that wellbeing environment so it's consistent across the board, no matter where you worked in the Alliance, no matter which organisation, that it felt the same. And that was a really important part of what we were trying to do. And the outcomes of some of the things that we did, we saw increased supplier collaboration. So supplier partners got together to talk about topics such as the menopause and share resources. We saw collaboration through some of our big partners as well. And some of the partners I've connected with subsequently from that as well. But the biggest thing was about that equitableness, if that's a word, around making sure that everyone had access to resources, support and wellbeing information, no matter where they worked. Thanks, everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Danielle. Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Thank you. I think I absolutely love this case study when we first started talking about it, and I was really keen for you to be part of this webinar today, because I think, yeah, it's a lot of the questions we got through the process of developing this guide was, you know, it's great for the larger organisations, but what can we do as kind of maybe medium or smaller organisations to kind of embed and practically use some of the content that's in the guide. And I think this is a really good kind of example of that. I do have a question for you, but I'm going to put it in the chat now, and so you can kind of think about your answers when we do the Q&A kind of in a little bit, rather than taking up too much of the other speakers' time. potentially putting you on the spot. But but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're here from Samantha Anthony. Samantha is a learning and development advisor who's going to take us through the impact Costain's Empower programme, the impact for the women who have been through it. And I think this is a really key example that mentioned earlier on of where wellbeing and inclusion intersect within the guidance itself. So Samantha, thank you, and over to you.
That's lovely. Thank you for that introduction, and hi everybody. So the first thing, Grace has just talked about our Empower programme, which is, focused at the females in the organisation. And so the first thing I wanted to highlight is that at Costain, we absolutely recognise the concept of empowerment doesn't sit in isolation for females. This programme is specifically focused in this area, but one of our next steps is to create development resources that are focused around empowerment for the whole of the business, so that individuals, line managers and mentors within the business can utilise them, and then we can, because we recognise the sort of wider positive impact this will have on our workforce. So how did this programme come about? So over the last few years, the business has worked really hard to improve its data around ED&I. And as a result of that, we were able to look across the genders, across the pay band genders, and really highlighted a bit of a glass ceiling when it comes to certain bands in the organisation. Around the same time, our Women's Network had done a survey, which was super useful for this programme in terms of the analysis work to feed in, which identified a variety of themes that we were hearing from that network, or from the females in the business. So some of those themes were that females were experiencing imposter syndrome within the business, and that was then having an impact in terms of them, or sort of preventing them from applying for promotions, or, so other lateral move positions. What we heard back also was that females were self-censoring in terms of, current development programs. So some of our leadership programs that we currently are delivering, they felt that they weren't for them. So that was something else we wanted to combat and look at. And they were highlighting that not every woman wants to be a high flyer in the organisation. So, there's that range of different sort of aspirations and wants. Some absolutely do want to be leaders. Some want to just be really good at what they do in their own role. They'd highlighted the lack of visibility and celebration of our female leaders in the business. So they weren't able to see those important role models. And they also were looking at sort of coaching and mentoring. They expressed that interest in having that in the workplace. And probably the last one, they also talked about their line managers and their leaders, and the potential benefit of sort of updating knowledge around, what are the difference in terms of how do different genders operate in the workplace, and also some of the mechanics around things like, starting to consider dynamic working, part-time contracts, job sharing, compressed hours, and the impact that can have when it's maybe not managed in the way that we would hope. So with all this feedback, and there was a lot of really valuable feedback there, our ED&I team, so Jyoti specifically, and our talent development team looked to work in collaboration to build a programme that was completely informed by these themes and this data in terms of us producing the outcomes, which the business now knows as our Empower programme. So how did we build a programme? So, we talked about looking at what the needs are of females within the business. We looked at identifying a target audience using criteria that we shaped from the data. After looking at that criteria, we sort of whittled down a pilot group from across the organisation, across the different bandings that we'd identified, taking in a few other bits of criteria. And then we went and asked a pilot cohort to support us with shaping the programme. So it's great to have all of that data, but we needed our pilot group to really be able to give us that feedback on what was working for them, what wasn't, on their ideas in terms of how things were landing. And this is an ongoing approach for the organisation. Every group has a different need. So we're on our second cohort now, and our first pilot cohort are really active in terms of supporting moving forward. So what did we build? So we built a 6-month programme with a mixture of in-house and externally delivered workshops. We heard from panels of female leaders in the business, and we looked at opportunities for mentoring. The programme was aimed at providing an opportunity for women to have a space and support to identify what their strengths are, their aspirations, and to be able to articulate them, and more confidently to be able to progress their career in whatever way they chose. And I think that's key, is what in terms of what is right for them. We look to equip them with self-awareness tools so they could reflect, increase their confidence, lean into their strengths. We wanted them to feel invested in by senior leaders in the business, build a strong network in terms of setting them up for success, thinking about senior sponsors and mentors as well. And then also that, that networking piece around connecting them with other inspiring women inside and outside of the organisation, so they could really hear other people's career journeys and navigate the challenges, or hear how other people have navigated the challenges. Also, in tandem with that, we wanted to support line managers to be able to advocate for their team members during and after the programme, raise their awareness of potential differences in terms of the way in which different genders may approach work and the challenges that are faced with women in the workplace. And that so all of that was sort of in the mix. So what are we seeing? So we now come to the end of the second cohort. So you'll see on the slide there, that's our second cohort, and those are some of the comments from them that are hot off the press. I will be honest, I haven't quite finished looking at analysing all the data yet, but that gives you a good feel for what they're experiencing. So, learners are feeling invested in after being on the programme. They're feeling seen, heard by senior leaders in the business. They're much more aware of their strengths generally, and not just their strengths, but the value those strengths can bring to their current role and the wider business. I'm seeing them be much more visible in the business now, so they're starting to sort of be more comfortable with that, stepping outside their comfort zones, maybe sort of popping up in different areas, talking about their expertise. And they've expanded their network. So, they've had opportunities to look off project and, really talk to people in different areas in the business. So for cohort 1, we have got the data around that. So some of the areas that we're looking at, so 5 out of 12 of the first cohort of move roles, either on programme or within the first 3 months of stepping off the programme. There we had 2 promotions and 3 lateral moves between sort of projects. We also had some individuals join our Emerging Leaders programme. And what we're hearing from those groups now is they are starting to recognise the need of others in terms of empowerment, and this has happened quite organically, and they are starting to support others. So what next for us? So next for us is to set up a talent development programme, alumni, where we can continue to support these individuals and produce the resources to support the whole organisation. I'll hand back over to you, Grace.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Samantha. I'm afraid my internet dipped a little bit, so I did miss some of the bit in the middle, but I will go back and catch up on the recording. Thank you so much. And it really does look like you are using that kind of data-led approach to best support the people in your organisation, and how wonderful for this group of individuals, female individuals within your organisation, to feel supported and kind of have that support. And it's brilliant to hear that you have engaged with line managers as part of that process. I think that's really, really positive. Please do add, oh, Laura, you've got your hand up. I don't know if you want to ask a question. Perhaps if we...
Sorry, it was a mistake.
Sorry. Okay. if we leave questions to the end, because I'm conscious of time and conscious to move on to the next case study and to hear from Neil, please do put kind of questions in the chat. I'll be thinking of your question for the end of the Q&A section. So I'd like to introduce Neil Christie. Neil is a senior health, safety, environment and wellbeing manager at AtkinsRealis. Neil will take us through key points of the Thrive leadership programme, a programme that helped the most senior leaders within the organisation understand their accountability for wellbeing. Welcome, Neil. It's great to hear from you.
Thanks, Grace, and morning, everyone. Yes, thanks for allowing me some time to come and speak to you all this morning. Yes, so I'll give you a quick overview of Thrive, which is our health, safety and wellbeing leadership programme, which we've developed in partnership with the conversation expert Rob Kendall. I'll just start probably with a little bit of why we developed the programme in the first place, and you know, there's a few reasons to explain the why Thrive, but it probably started out with this recognition that, you know, the world of work's changed, and so the way in which we wanted to think about risk needed to change too, to be broader than it once was. We wanted to, you know, to think about health, safety and well-being in a much more interconnected way, more holistically, if you like, and caring about the whole person. And whilst, you know, traditionally we've been good at managing physical safety risks, our understanding of psychosocial risks, so things like chronic stress, mental ill health, suicide was a little less well established. Well, so yeah, as with many global organisations, you know, AtkinsRealis works in different industries and sectors across the world, and we also recognise that, you know, we wanted to create this sort of overarching view of health, safety and well-being that everyone in the organisation could relate to. So a shared philosophy or a worldview, if you like, and trying to give our people this common language on health, safety and well-being, which they could all understand regardless of which part of the world they operated in. And then, as well as this, you know, we also wanted to apply some of the new leadership theories to health, safety and well-being. So trying to get away from this, you know, I suppose maybe the more old thinking of fixing issues to creating environments that would allow people to thrive. And then that really brings us to the intent of the programme, which you see on the slide there. It's to support AtkinsRealis leaders to create the environments in which people can thrive and deliver safe work in a complex world. The bottom of the screen, you can see the 842, and that's what that's what we call it, the 842. It's what the programme's centred around. It's 8 big ideas, it's 4 leadership practices, and 2 tools which we explore over the 2-day programme. It starts off, you know, we aim to create this psychologically safe space where the leaders can just step back from the intensity of their daily lives a bit, have a bit of time to think about their leadership shadow and their own impact on people's health, safety and well-being. We spend a bit of time looking at the brain and how it works, and then exploring really how feelings impact on decision making. And then we also spend a little bit of time comparing ourselves to world-class athletes as we look at, you know, how prioritising recovery is really the key to sustaining high performance. Yeah, over the course of the 2 days, you know, we ask the leaders to fully immerse themselves in the experience, because we know that the value really comes from the conversations that they have in the room. It's certainly not death by PowerPoint, and you know, I always find that it's the 2 days are really filled with rich, deeply fulfilling conversations that are, you know, both inspiring and practical in equal measure. We're often asked whether it's a health, safety and wellbeing programme or a leadership programme, and the truth is it's both. And I think this is probably one of the keys to why it's been such a success for us. The way we've managed to pitch the programmes allowed all of our senior leaders who've attended it so far to get value from it, both in thinking about how they could be a health, safety and wellbeing leader, as well as getting value for their own personal leadership skills. And by doing this, you know, the programme has really allowed us to move sort of health and safety and wellbeing away from something that's done in the margins or owned by the function, if you like, but to something a bit more mainstream that's owned by everyone. And, you know, we spend time over those 2 days just reminding our leaders that, you know, like it or not, they are all health, safety and wellbeing leaders. In terms of how it's gone, yeah, it's been a huge success, actually, even better than we probably hoped for when we started out. By the end of this week, we'll have reached over 500 of our very most senior leaders in the organisation, including our CEO, Ian Edwards, his ex-com, his operations leadership group. So yeah, I mean, we're really delighted at how that's gone. One of the other questions that we are asked, and I'm sure probably some of you are wondering, is how are we measuring the programme's success? And I think in truth, it's probably a little bit difficult to quantify at the moment. I think with all culture change programmes, it'll take some time to see. So we'll probably measure it over years rather than weeks or months. But what it did to help us identify quite early on is there was definitely room for improvement in some of our wellbeing data. So the programmes helped us build a little momentum around this to help us establish some better baseline information. We've added some more wellbeing related questions to our annual engagement survey, and we're also looking at how we can blend in some of the concepts of Thrive with the annual objective setting programme. Or process, sorry. Something that is tangible though, and we see this, and we pretty much saw this immediately from launching the programme, is just how quickly our leaders they're using the language of Thrive within their teams and in public forums. You know, they're doing things like check-ins more regularly. They're using, you know, the phrase "how wobbly is your line" can be heard, and that's one of the concepts. It can be heard in meetings and around the offices, and even, you know, in our recent global town hall, our CEO was talking about what he was doing around prioritising recovery, which is, you know, is really fantastic to hear, and obviously sort of gives us a little skip as we continue with the development of the programme. And then I think another measure of the success is just really the pool that we're getting from the business. It's been incredible, really high levels of engagement, which has been fantastic to see as well. I think we actually talk about it right at the start of the programme when we do a bit on engagement. We do a higher or lower pub quiz using some global statistics around engagement, and you know what we're doing with that is just showing them the strong evidence around how high levels of engagement not only improves employee well-being, but it also it results in improvements in all aspects of business performance, so safety decisions, business decisions, quality, productivity, all that stuff. And I guess that's what we see with Thrive right from the start. There's been unprecedented levels of engagement and a huge pull from the business for a much faster and wider rollout. So even with our plans to, you know, we're going to launch a one-day version hopefully next year and reach another 1,200 leaders, you know, we're still not really fully meeting the demand that's been generated. But yeah, you know, I say that as if it's a problem. It's a great problem to have, isn't it? The programme's really helping us to drive our strategy. It's helping us to think much more holistically about risk, and it's helping us to support our leaders to be role models for health, safety, and well-being. And I think most importantly, you know, it's helping us to create those environments for our people to thrive. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for your time. I'll pass back to Grace.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Neil. We've got a couple of comments in the chat, and that's really positive. And I'm just going to echo Ash's comment about you sort of really shining a spotlight, I suppose, on the accountability in leadership for wellbeing, and that's very much what the social kind of chapter of the guidance is all about. It's all about kind of setting that positive example from the top and also kind of across the organisation as well. Please do pop your questions in the chat for Neil and we'll address them at the Q&A. But thank you so much, Neil, for sharing your insights on that, and best of luck as you start to kind of develop and move through those next steps as you talked about. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're moving on to our final case study. Last by no means least, global medical advisor from International SOS will share his learnings from a proactive health program that was delivered to an international client. So this is our out of sector example. It was delivered to an international client in a male dominated environment. So Rod, can I ask you to please share more information about this case study, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Grace. So I think two learnings or two takeaway messages from this case study I'll go through. And that was that when you design a well-being program, you know, at HQ level or something for the entire organization, it's always a tricky balance between designing sort of best practice and designing something that's consistent globally, especially if you're a multinational, but that has a local relevance in terms of culture and needs of the local population. So if you think of, most of the businesses probably you're in, you might have very specific projects, whether that's, nationally, internationally, that have very specific requirements. So the rule that we've been using is the 80-20 kind of approach. So 80% of the issues will be cross-cutting, and 20% you'll need that local tailoring. And so this is an example of when we took that 20% for a very specific need. The second takeaway was that we have, many years of good practice and kind of, I wouldn't say standards, but sort of the norm in terms of what organizations put in place from employee, well-being service offerings, such as, EAPs, for instance. But sometimes it's worthwhile thinking outside of the box and not deciding, okay, we've done, this is what's on offer. We're going to go and develop, a turnkey solution for these employees. Sometimes we got to kind of think differently. So in a nutshell, this particular organization was, as Grace mentioned, male-dominated industry where they were seeing year on year, they were noticing increased number of cases related to mental health, or that was anxiety, depression, burnout. They were having issues with retention of staff because of the same. And so, all of this was then compiled by the fact that the project where they were working on was adjacent to a conflict prone area, which of course we're unfortunately seeing more and more of these days around the world. And so they said, okay, what do we have in place? They said, we have an EAP in place, but nobody was using the EAP. And so you'll probably know that, EAP utilization is roughly on average around 2%. Most organizations, the best we've seen is around 10%, but it's usually single digits. And so that wasn't really, cutting the mustard. So we said, what can we do that's unique and different? So we decided to turn the delivery model on its head. And instead of people who are at high risk calling or that needed support calling the EAP, we said, why don't we design a program where the EAP calls them? And so essentially we had trained nurses that had a background in conflict zones, and we developed these protocols where once a week they would call the employees. They would have sort of a script where they could escalate any medical cases to further assistance if they needed, and if not, it was just an opportunity to chat and check in. And I naively thought that nobody was going to want to use this service. Rough guys working in heavy industry, they would get a phone call and they would say, I don't want to talk to you. Don't call me again. But surprisingly, around 70 to 80% of people were so happy with it that they said, yes, I want to talk to you every week. And what we learned was it wasn't just about the mental health pressures that came up in the conversation. It was other issues they were having to deal with around access to healthcare, around job design. So immediately it served a double purpose where we didn't necessarily just deal with the issue we thought was the main problem, but then uncovered a bunch of different issues which we said, okay, we need a further plan for this. So it was a great initiative, and we even caught 6 cases of early onset sort of depression, burnout that we prevented from escalating. They got treatment. And they said, I didn't even know I had depression, but because I was talking to somebody, they made me figure out that I did have an issue. So that was really positive to hear. So again, takeaway message. Sometimes for specific populations in an organization, you might need to design particularly, culturally relevant or population relevant approach. And then second point is sometimes you really need to just sit down with the end users of that service and say, okay, what is it that you guys really need and more importantly want? And then how can we design something out of the box that's specific for you? So that was the main learnings of this case. Back to you, Grace.
Brilliant, thank you, Rod. I really love this case study, and it's getting some love in the chat as well. This idea of flipping the service model to kind of think about how we can proactively be preventing cases of mental health or wellbeing related ill health. So thank you. A huge thank you again to all of our speakers. It's brilliant to hear kind of more information about these case studies. I am going to hand back over to Laura now to lead our Q&A, and hopefully we can address some of the questions that are coming up in the chat. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah, I'm going to go to those in a second, but while Rod's still there and on screen, Rod, I've just got a really quick follow-up question, if that's okay, because obviously you've been involved in looking at wellbeing in our industry because you're involved in the guidance, but also in other sectors as well. And I'd just be really interested to get your take on, where you think we are in comparison to other industries in terms of our wellbeing approach.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and having been working with setting sort of standards and guidelines for over a decade, I think what really comes to mind is it seems that what people will see tomorrow will be somewhere in the middle of what's out there. So by that I mean you usually have standards, and this is probably the majority of them out there for different industries, whether they're extractive industries, whether they're those that even have standards, which are very, very few. They will be so general that they will give very little practical advice for people reading them in terms of what they actually need to do. There's stuff we usually already know. So they're good in terms of like advocacy, but not really in terms of getting stuff done and being proactive. And then on the other side, you have very strict operational standards that are so tight that they miss the mark many times, and they don't evolve over time. So if you look at like the standards for, say, fit to work assessments, like going offshore, they haven't changed in so long, and they're so narrow that they sometimes miss the mark. So what I really like about this one is it's somewhere in the middle where it's so broad in scope, and there's so many good case studies and practical examples that it's general enough that probably everyone will find something that resonates with them, but it's specific enough in terms of the actual examples that they'll find actually how to do it and get good ideas in terms of implementation.
Great, thank you, Rod. And yeah, I hope that is the case. I hope everybody, when you get your coffee tomorrow, it is as Rod said, it is helpful. We've written it to be a practical guide. And actually some of the questions that I'm going to go to first are about how this could work in a smaller organisation. So Neil, I'm just giving you a warning, I'm coming to you first. There's a question from Patricia, and she's saying, she loves the aspect of accountability that you talked about, and she's asking for any advice for getting that senior engagement in a small organisation. And then there's a follow-up question from Karen about how can health, safety and wellbeing be developed into SMEs.
I mean, we were fortunate. Right from the start, we had a very senior sponsor who was completely engaged and keen that we develop a program like this. So that was fortunate. But I guess that's the thing, isn't it? It's trying to prove the case for the program, isn't it, or for the investment, isn't it? I mentioned we do a quiz around engagement, and it's a bit of fun, but what we're doing is we're making it explicitly clear that higher levels of engagement improves well-being, which improves all aspects of business performance. There's loads of data around that, so I think we tried to make the case quite early on that there's real business benefits to this, and I think that's probably the case that we if you can get the sort of someone very senior sponsoring a program like this or an initiative like this, then it just becomes a directive. Our CEO basically said, I've made 2 days available to do this. So should you, sort of thing. That's kind of the approach. So I think, I think it's probably about developing a bit of a case around why we should do this, and sort of talking the language that they'll relate to, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And I think Patricia, any data that you have, we look at health and safety statistics and we look at days lost. If you can get a business case together for how the negative impact of well-being on a group of people, you can really start to put together a business case. And I know that's what we did in Mott MacDonald, and then that can help to find your senior sponsor in that way. So it's and then I think, Karen, just following up on your question, it is about trying to understand what, talk to your people and find what is negatively impacting them and how is it impacting them, and then you can start to try and understand your wellbeing risk profile a bit better and start to look at, when I said at the very beginning, it's complex, there's lots of different strands, it impacts people in so many different ways, but it does have an impact on morale, motivation, productivity, and you can bring those things together in a business case, but they're harder to measure. So anything that you can measure, I think, is a really good starting point. I'm going to come back to Danielle now from the beginning. So Danielle, there's a question from Asha about the reach of your resources, and are there any opportunities to make these bite size? Oh, you're on mute, Danielle.
Always one. There we go. In terms of its reach, we've reached the whole of the alliance, but what I do know is also it's been reached into other organisations and partner organisations as well. And Asha, I know we connected through the resource that was shared back through Costain as an example. So it is reaching all of our suppliers and the partner organisations within the alliance as well. There's definitely a possibility to make it bite-sized. However, the project is coming to an end, so I'll be moving back into my full-time normal role soon. But there is, I will see if we can pull that off. That's a challenge for me.
Thanks, Danielle. And just to follow up, Grace's question at the beginning about how you're tracking it, how you're tracking the programme.
Yeah, so we, as part of the Alliance, there is a big survey that happens every single year, and the last survey results were really positive for wellbeing. So I just kind of found the data as I was listening in, and one of the questions was, does the Alliance demonstrate they prioritise health and wellbeing? And we had 92% of people that completed said yes. So that was a really positive score. We've been tracking that the last few years within the programme, but there's also that sort of the sentiments that we're tracking as well. So they're not as easy data to sort of capture. And so we do know that there is more collaboration happening across some of the businesses as well around wellbeing activities. So we know that's happening. I'm just reading my notes kind of to prepare for Grace's question. I think that was everything. My brain has just stopped. I think the mute thing has shifted my brain.
Thank you, Danielle. That was great. And I think, just going back to Karen's question about developing, these types of programs, if, once you've developed something, if you can try and think about how you can measure it, that helps to give confidence to senior managers as well that you're going in the right direction. And it doesn't have to be, something massive or huge at the beginning, just small things to begin with. But it's looking at, I suppose having a baseline helps, understanding what your current position is, introducing things and then you can say, well, are they working or not? And that gives you an idea if you're going in the right direction.
I remembered what I was going to say, Laura, so if that's okay. So the other thing, because of the way that the organisation works, the enterprise works, we weren't able to track some of the data that we are able to kind of from an organisational level, but we were able to track from the survey. We also have a wellbeing check-in tool that we're using on some of the schemes, and we did do a stress risk assessment. So we're able to use that as that review piece to capture the initial data and then monitor and some of those risks. So we did it in that way because we can't capture some of that organisational data being a project rather than the organisation.
Thank you, Danielle. Samantha, I think you might have answered this in the chat, but it'd be really great if you could just go through it, because there's a question from Asha about line managers, specifically about how they get involved in encouraging and supporting women on your Empower programme. And this is a really good question, because Grace and I talk about line managers all the time, how important they are and how we enable them. So it'd be really great to hear your views on this, Samantha.
Yeah, we'd agree with you totally in that area. And I think line managers are key in terms of supporting that journey afterwards. If we're asking, a cohort to step outside of their comfort zone, in the workplace, we want to make sure they've got the backup there. And luckily at Costain, we do have that. But what we are doing is, supporting that. So line managers are with us throughout the programme. So, we ask the learners and their line managers to complete pre-programme surveys where we look at sort of confidence levels, that kind of thing, and just pick up on any data around that. And then we do that for the cohort and line managers afterwards. We have regular touch points where we when I give them a briefing on content more than anything and any themes. So if there is something particular that's going on for this group or a particular cohort, I'll talk to them about that, or I'll signpost them to resources that maybe isn't quite as you need to read this. It's a little bit more sort of tactful or delicate in that approach, but also we invite them to view some of the panels with our senior leaders who are being more vulnerable than maybe they would in a normal leadership program. So they're really hearing some of those challenges. I have a reflection session just for them so that they can go, what happened there? How did that happen? And we have a lot of conversations. We've got a lot of people that work, away at projects, for example, maybe have more traditional setups, but how, really it's talking to them about, these individuals are exactly that. These women are individuals, rather than seeing them as, in a particular role that maybe society sees them. But we are going to do some more work around that as well, so that the line managers can really hear the benefits from the cohorts and the learners of what their journey is. It's just the balance between keeping it really safe in terms of that empowerment journey, but making sure that the individuals and line managers can sort of update their knowledge as well.
Great, thank you. I really like that. We all need time to reflect, don't we? And it's the one thing that we don't really get a chance to do often. So anything that enables that is fantastic. We're going to close the questions to an end there. Thank you so much for posting your questions. If we haven't had a chance to answer them, or if you've got specific questions that you want to send in to the panel, I think we are going to put an email address in the chat, which you can use, and we will do our best to get them to the right person and get a response for you. I think, Andrew, you were going to put your email in, maybe.
I've added my email into the chat, so please do feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Fantastic. So those will go to Andrew at the ACE, and he will field those. So please do, and apologies if we didn't get round to your specific question today. So I'd like to end with some thank yous, really. First of all, thank you to everybody today, to all our speakers and panelists, and to all of you for attending. I'd like to do a huge thank you to all my colleagues at Mott MacDonald, at the ACE and International SOS, who collaborated so wonderfully on this project for the event itself. And there were people from other organisations involved in the workshops at the event. And then we also had people from across the industry who have peer reviewed the document. So it's really a collaborative effort from everybody involved in the industry, which is fantastic. And I do think it's the first of its kind. I hesitate to say that, but I think it's I'm immensely proud of it. So you will receive a link to that tomorrow, and there will also be a link to the recording of this session and to a very short survey, which we would really like to get your feedback on, if that's okay. So have a fantastic World Mental Health Day tomorrow. Have your wellbeing conversations, share the guidance amongst your teams, and let us know what you think. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.